Hello everyone, welcome to our day 5 of our 30 days of code challenge. And in today's session, we are going to build a counter application with dynamic button and a smooth animation. Let's dive right in and let's start building this our counter application. So right now, I'm going to open my VS Code. So now I'm opening my VS Code. So let's create another folder for our day 5. Very good. So I'm canceling this. Let me create 3 different files. So one is going to be our HTML file. So let's name that counter.html. This is what we are going to use for our framework, for our HTML framework. That's the counter, that's the HTML file, counter.html. Then I'm going to create another file. Let me call it counter.css. So this counter.css is what we are going to use to decorate, is what we are going to use to design our counter application. Then the last but not the least, the file that I'll be creating now is the counter.js. So this is our JavaScript file that we are going to use to add functionality to our application. So let's begin from the HTML file. So let me go live so I can view whatever I'm doing in real time. Let me minimize the screen. Very good. So the first thing I'm going to do, I'm going to change the title of this application to counter app. That's great. So the next thing I want to do now is that I want to link my CSS file. I want to link it to this HTML file. So in order to link our CSS file to our HTML file, we have to do the link that'll be well equals to style sheet. Then the href equals to counter dot css. Wow, this is great. So after linking our CSS file to our HTML file, the next thing is to link our JavaScript file to our HTML file. So to link the JavaScript file to the HTML file, that should be script src for source, and that's going to be counter dot js. Now my CSS file is successfully linked to my HTML file, and my JavaScript file is also linked to my HTML file. Let's start building our application. So the first thing I'm going to do, I'm going to create a label. And this label is going to contain a text of 0, because I want my counter to start from 0, which is the origin of all numbers, 0. So I want to give this label an ID, which I'll be using to call it, which I'll be using to design it further on. So this label, I want to give it an ID of count label. So the count label has been set to 0. So after creating the label file, I want to create a div. So this div is going to contain my buttons. So let me just give it a class of, an ID of button containers. So this div is button containers. And just as the ID implies, this div is going to contain a series of buttons. Actually, it's going to contain 3 different buttons. Very good. So the first button, um, the first button will be to decrease, and this button, I want to give it an ID of decrease button. So this button have an ID of decrease button, but I also want to give it a class of buttons. This will make it easy to call all the buttons all together. Right about now, this is that my zero and the decrease button, they are a little bit on top of each other. I want to create some spacings. So to create those spacings, I'm going to use the break element. BL. So let me use another one again. That will make it double BL. Very good. So with this double BL, I have enough spacing between my label and my buttons. So let me minimize this so I can see what I'm doing very well. So now we've created the button of the quiz button. Let's create another button. So this second button, you are going to call it reset. We are going to use this button to reset whatever it is that we are doing. So let's give it an ID of reset button. And also it's going to have a class of buttons. Great. So we have just one more button remaining. That's button. So this is going to be, since we have decrease, we have reset, the third button is going to be increase. Increase. So this increase button is going to have an ID of increase button. It is also going to have a class of buttons. Wow, this looks great. So we have just successfully created our framework for our counter application. Now let's first of all, let's design this application a little bit before we start adding functionality to this counter application. The very first thing that I want to design is my label, and this label have an ID of count label. So let's move on to that in our CSS. Whenever we want to call on an ID, we have to use the hash. So very good. So now this hash count label. So this will be referring to the what? To the label that we have earlier on. So I want to set this label, I want to set it to a display of block. I want to set it to a display of block. I also increase the size. So the font size, I'll increase the font size to 2.8 REM. That is a little bit small. Let me change it back to 10 REM. Very good. This looks okay. 10 REM. So I don't want my counter application to be by the side of my screen. I want it to be in the middle of my screen. So to do that, I'm going to change the text align. Text align, I'll change it to center. Text align center. Yeah, let me give it some padding. Let me give it a padding of 20 px and 30 px. Very good. So that's more spacing for my label. So my label is good to go right about now. So the next thing that I will be designing is my button container. Remember that the button container is the div that contains all the buttons. So let's design the button containers a little bit now. So that will be button containers. Yeah. So for the button container, let me change it to the middle. So to bring it to the middle, we are going to have text align. Once I have a text align of what? Center. Very good. So with this text align center, we have just successfully bring our buttons to the middle of my what? To the middle of my screen. But the buttons are looking a little bit old-fashioned. They are small compared to the label, and they are not really that attractive. Let's change that narrative. So to do that, we are going to go to class of buttons. That will be dot buttons. So note from this that whenever I want to call on ID, we use the hash. We use the hash. We use the hash. But whenever I want to call on the whenever I want to call on the class, we use the dot, which is the full stop. So for calling on ID, we use hash, but for calling on classes, we use full stop. So let's go on from here. And as you have the full stop of buttons, the first thing that I want to do is that I want to increase the size of this button. So to increase the size of this button, we are going to have a font size. Font size. Um, let's make it 1.5 REM. Very good. This looks a little bit good. Font size 1.5 REM. Let's make the font width to be bold. Font weight bold. Great. So the next thing we want to do now is that we want to add, let's add some spacings in between the buttons and among the buttons. So to do that, we are going to have a padding of 20 pixels. Good. A padding of 20 pixels did well. Now let's add some margins to it. Let's add a margin of 10 pixels. So let me maximize my screen so you can see what it actually looks like. So with a margin of 10 pixels, we now have some spaces in between the words, in between the buttons. And for the paddings, the padding is what gives us this space, this space, this space, and what we have here. So the padding created the space at the top and bottom of the button with the left and right of the button. But for the margin, it creates space between each buttons. So after doing this, the next thing we want to do is to make the edge of the button a little bit curved, and for that we are going to use our border radius. So the border radius is going to be 10 pixels. 10 pixels. 10 pixels. That's great. So after this, the next thing I want to do is the background color. But to change the background color, I want to use linear gradients. And for the linear gradients, I'm going to use blue, red, and black. So I'll make this to white. Very good. And after this, I'll be changing my color. Okay. So we have designed our button. Let me maximize my screen so you can see what it looks like. Okay, this is great. This is cool. So another thing I want to do now is that I want to add some over effects to this. But before adding the over effects, the first thing I want to do is that I want to add some box shadow to the buttons. So now I have box shadow. So I have 0, 3px, 5px. So I just created some box shadows that is giving my button some shadows. So the next thing now is to add some transition effect. So whenever I hover above these buttons, I want there to be some changes. So the first change that I want to implement now is that whenever I hover my mouse above this button, I want it to change in coloration. Number one, I want there to be a change of coloration. Number two, I want there to be an increase in size of the buttons. I want the size of the buttons to increase whenever we hover above it. So that will be transition. So the first one is going to be transform. The transformation is going to take place after 0.3 seconds. Great. And then the next one, the box shadow. The box shadow should also take effect after 0.3 seconds. And one more thing I want to add to this is that I want to make it ease. Box shadow is 0.3 seconds ease. And then the last but not the least, the background should also change after 0.3 seconds. It should also be what? Ease. Very good. So let's do what we have planned. Starting with the button class. So whenever we hover above this button class, first of all, we want it to transform in size. So that will be transform scale of 1.1. So the next thing we want to add to this is that whenever we hover around this, we want to change the box shadow. So that will be the box shadow. So the box shadow should be 0, 8px, 15px. I want to remove this background from it. Okay, now let's add some corrections to that. That will be RGBA 0, 0, 0, then 0.9. Let's see. Okay, let me add the background first of all. So the background, linear gradient, make it yellow, green, Purple. The hover effect is not displaying correctly. Sorry, it's supposed to be buttons, not just button. It's supposed to be buttons. Yeah. So let me change this to right. So to right. Very good. So anytime we hover above it now, it changes in coloration, it changes in scale, it also changes in what? In bulk shadow. But this color, let me adjust this color. Let me adjust this color. I want this for the green. I want this. Why for the purple? I want this. Okay, let's see what that looks like. Very good. Very good. Very good. So whenever we hover around the buttons, it changes in size. It also changes. We also have some change in the box shadow. The box shadow becomes more obvious when we hover above it. So let me maximize my screen so you can see the full view. So now this is the app. This is the counter application. We have the decrease button, the reset button, and the increase button. But none of it is working yet. So in order to make it start working, let's add some functionality to our buttons. To add the functionality to our buttons, we are going to go to the counter.js. But one thing about JavaScript is that before you begin working with anything under JavaScript, you must first of all declare it. So today we'll be working with 4 variables. We'll be working with the increase button, the decrease button, the reset button, and also the count label. So let's declare those factors now. So the first one we'll be declaring is what we have at the top, which is the label. So let's declare our const count label equals to documents dot get elements by id, documents dot get elements by id. Let's make it count label. So the next one is const increase button. So the increase button is going to be equal to documents dot get elements by id increase button. So the next one is what? The reset button. Const reset button equals to documents dot get elements by id reset button. And the last but not the least is going to be our decrease button. So then we are going to have const decrease button equals to documents dot get elements by id decrease button. Very good. We have just declared the 4 variables that we'll be needing for this application. But then we need to add one more, because whenever we increase the amount of the counter, we should have a count that will be storing this value and then displaying it under the count label. So let's make this new variable to be equal to count. So now let's declare this count, and also let's attribute it to a value of 0, which means we are going to start our counting from 0. So let's count be equal to 0. So whenever we increase, we want this count to increase in value. Whenever we decrease, we want this count to decrease in value. And whenever we click on the reset button, we want to change the count value to be equal to 0. Let's start with that now. So the first thing that we are going to do, let's start with the decrease button. That will be, so what we are saying now is that whenever we click on the decrease button, we want there to be a decrease in the count value. That will be decrease button dot on click. So whenever you click on the decrease button, you want it to be equal to a function and in this function you want the count to what? To decrease by a value of 1. So as long as you continue to click on the decrease button, you want the count value to continue decreasing with a value of 1 each time. So after decreasing, you want to display the new value. So this new value will be displayed in our count label. So that for that we are going to have count label dot text content. Count label dot text content equals to the value of our count. Count label the text content equals the value of count. So let's try and let's see if that is working now, because we have just said that whenever we click on our decrease button, we want the value of the count to decrease and then want it to display this new value as the count label. Very good. Now when I click on the decrease button, the value just changed from 0 to -1. If I click it again, change to -2, again -3, again -4, again -5. It will continue to decrease as long as we are still clicking on the decrease button. So what if I don't feel like decreasing anymore? Now let's work on our reset button. So this reset button will enable us to reset the value back to 0. So to start working on the reset button, we are going to have reset button dot on click should be equal to a function count equals to 0. Count label dot text content equals to count. So let's see how this is going to work out. Whenever you click on the decrease button, the value is going to decrease. Now whenever you click on the reset button, it's going to reset the value back to 0. As you can see, you decrease, you reset back to 0, you decrease, you reset back to 0. What if you click on the increase? For now, it is not performing any function. The increase button is just dormant, but we don't want that to be. Let's change the narrative. Let's add some functionality to our increase button and see what that is going to give us. So now we have the increase dot on click. That is, whenever we click on the increase button, what should happen? That should be equal to a function and this function should consist of counts. We want the count to increase. As long as we keep on clicking on the increase button, we want the value of the count to keep on increasing by a value of 1 each time, and we want it to display this new value in our count label. That will be count label dot text content should be equal to count. Wow, we have just done that. Let's see if it works. If you click on the increase button now, the value is supposed to what? Increase. Now let's click it once. Let's see. Increase button. Oh, I made a mistake in assigning the increase button. Sorry. Increase button. Very good. So now when you click on the increase button, I made a mistake in typing the text content. So there's a typo error here. So we have text content. I'm going to change that to text content. So now whenever we click on the increase button, we should have an increase in our value. So as long as I keep on increase, as long as I continue clicking on this increase button, the value will continue to increase. And if I click on the decrease button, the value will decrease from the point at which I start clicking on the decrease button. If I click on the reset button, it will change back to 0. If I click on increase, it increases in value. Decrease, decrease in value. Increase, increase in value again. Decrease, continue decreasing in value. Reset, reset changes it back to 0. So this is what we have just created today. Today, we just created a counter application using HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. We use our HTML to create the structure of our counter application, which consists of the count label, consists of the increase button, the decrease button, and the reset button. We designed the counter application using our CSS to make it a little bit more attractive, and then we added functionality to this counter application using JavaScript. And with this functionality, let me maximize my screen now. With this functionality, we can now increase the value of the count label simply by clicking on the increase button. We can increase the value by clicking on the increase button. We can decrease the value by clicking on the decrease button. And we can set the value back to 0 by clicking on the reset button. So this is what we have created today. Tell me if you feel which part of it do you find attractive the most? Which part of it would you like to modify? Which part would you like to try? What is the next project that you want us to attempt? Thank you so much for being there. This is what we have for our day 5 of our 30 days of code challenge. I look forward to having you in subsequent sessions as we explore more parts and more functionalities in the world of code. Welcome to Tech with Rex.